After showing the world how cute they are, Hans immediately go to the outside. While Kale was bathing, Ron approached the cats, standing from above to assess. He noticed that they were Wercat, the race that is famous for their stealthy movement and very fast speed. If they're trained, they'll be very helpful. So their live on the fat of the land lives ended. Since Ron will train them, as a gift to give to young master. The cat sisters kept following him, hung onto his feet to ingratiate him. Kale thought it was time for them to pay for the meals. The cats seemed to understand that and tacitly agreed, but what he wanted them to do was still a mystery. For days later, the whole Count's family gathered at the dinner table. Count de Ruth started talking about Kale going to the capital today. According to the original, it was raining today, and it was also the day Kale was knocked out by Choi Han, but now things are different. Not only did he not get hit, but he also gained ancient power from his indestructible shield. He felt its existence in his body. Even now if he dared to mess with Ron and Beakrox, he would come back safe and sound. Back to the main story. Kale observantly noticed that the number of his servants tended to increase instead of decreasing as he requested. So he mentioned this problem to his father. Turned out this was due to the arrangement of his stepmother, Countess Violin. She did it all because she thought about the face of the family. She couldn't let outsiders think that the Count's family was poor and needy. Kale thought about her family background. In the original, Violin was depicted as the eldest daughter of a poor baron and had dreams of becoming a celebrity. She gained influence by selling luxury items to the nobility. Then she moved to this territory and became fascinated with the art of sculpture. Then she met Count de Ruth and they fell in love. Now she has become a mainstay in the cultural heart of the territory. She is very proud of her life and satisfied with the family she lives in. It was true that bringing along a lot of servants would be fine. After all, without them even changing clothes would be inconvenient for Kale, who had become a lazy person now. But his concern is that in the future the mad black dragon will appear. And he doesn't know how many people will die if he can't deal with this dragon. It doesn't matter what others do, but he doesn't want to see anyone die right in front of him. And he doesn't want to be responsible for those who get hurt because of it. That's why he didn't want to bring a lot of people. Kale started talking with his stepmother Violin about art. Although he is not an expert, his comments about it are not cliché. Which makes Violin begin to like him more. In the end, the red-haired Kale's baggage to the capital had been decided. Violin had prepared the best and most expensive things for him. When the Count saw them talking in harmony, he couldn't help but rejoice. After that, he took back his position as the host, asking Kale if he had read the documents about the aristocrats he gave him or not. Of course, Kale read it, moreover he found it quite interesting. The Count was satisfied with his son's expression. Finally, he began to allude to the fact that the man-eating tree which had withered away became green again. Kale knew that his father knew about his frequent visits to the slum, but certainly didn't know the story of the ancient power. Maybe he just knew that Kale had done something to the tree. He reminded Kale to eat rumors, because there is nothing scarier than people's mouths and eyes. But if it was in the territory he manages, there wouldn't be any problem. Kale thought it was true that only living in this territory would give him a comfortable and worry-free life. He hoped that he could quickly go to the capital to complete the mission and return to enjoy the rest of his life here. After finishing eating, Kale said goodbye to everyone before leaving. The Count, due to his busy schedule, could not see him off, so he could only say goodbye here. His younger half-brother and sister also seemed to want to say something, but they didn't say anything. It was only when Kale started the conversation first that his quiet sister Lily began to wish him a safe journey. Kale also wished her good health. Lily was surprised, shyly replied to him. Kale approached the carriage that had been prepared, and as soon as he opened the door, he couldn't help but surprised at what he saw. The cat's bed is better than his. And of course, the owner of this work is nobody else but the deputy butler Hans. What a true servant! Afraid that the long journey would make the cats tired, Hans prepared it to help them feel more comfortable along the way. Because the young master is only fleeting, the kittens are everything. What a good butler! Kale thought it was just because he didn't know that they could create fog and release poison. Ron decided to sit next to the driver, and Choi Han thought that he should take another carriage, in order to easily protect Kale. Kale felt that it was a bit odd, but he could sit wherever he wanted. Until now, Choi Han's eyes are still full of hatred. It seems that he has not accepted to let go yet, so he is very confused. According to the original, after going with Beakrox, Rosalind, Locke, Choi Han became quieter but still had a knife in his heart. Seems like that's not really a bad thing. Not caring about the main character anymore, Kale got into the carriage, ordered the driver to depart, starting the journey towards the capital. On the carriage, K-Uyn considered letting Hans take care of the gifts for his siblings. Before he left, he asked them if they wanted him to bring any presents home. As expected, it was true that they wanted gifts. Lily asked for a sword. K-Uyn was quite surprised that a 7-year-old girl wanted such a special gift. Then, Basin explained that she was dreaming of becoming a swordsman. After all, it's possible since the Henadises have pretty good genes. Standard body proportions, long arms and legs, learning swordsmanship is like a fish in water. Moreover, for her age, Lily is taller than the others. With a little effort she can become a swordsman. So the gift she wanted, red-haired K-Uyn immediately agreed, promising to buy the most expensive one. After all, Lily is just a child. Hearing that, she was really happy, thanking him profusely. In contrast to a violent gift like his sister, the gift that Basin wanted was quite literary. It was a fountain pen. It was no problem. K-Uyn agreed to buy it for him. Suddenly the carriage stopped, interrupting K-Uyn's line of thought. He looked outside. Unexpectedly, they got robbed. Didn't they see the family crest on the carriage? Not to mention in his group, there are all retired gypsies, with boundless tricks. For example, this old Ron. His rabbit hunting skill was finally used. Ron calmed K-Uyn, who was sitting in the carriage, while he and the others dealt with the bandits. This time, the mountain bandits really have to give up their ancestors. Even with their backs, they can't save them. K-Uyn leisurely sat in the carriage, calculating the time to reach the village that would be destroyed by the Black Dragon. One more day left. After dealing with the mountain bandits, it was already getting dark, so K-Uyn's party decided to stop to rest. The main course of dinner is rabbit soup. Maybe the main ingredient was hunted by Choi-Han. It turns out that not only can he hunt humans, but he also knows how to hunt animals. The two cats saw that K-Uyn didn't seem to like it, so they meowed for food. But why should they eat his leftovers when the servant Hans is with there? Hans prepared for them their own healthy, salt-free, preservative-free meals. This time, K-Uyn's convoy faced off against the mountain bandits, in which the strongest person in the group, without a doubt, was Choi-Han. This battle for him was as easy as pie. There was not a scratch on his body. The one who hit the Count's son was really not an ordinary person. Ron saw that K-Uyn wasn't eating much, so he showed concern. K-Uyn knew that he was just making fun of him, so he talked perfunctorily to get rid of him. Only Choi-Han really cared, thought K-Uyn was not feel so good, so he didn't want to eat. Suddenly Choi-Han called him over. He stared at K-Uyn, making him feel uncomfortable. Turned out he was curious if this was K-Uyn's first time witnessing a battle. K-Uyn honestly answered that this encounter with the mountain bandits was the first time he experienced a battle. Because for someone who was born with a silver spoon in his mouth, protected in the Count's territory, how he could face a situation like this. But Choi-Han thought that this was also the first time facing danger, and that was a big mistake. He was the one who made K-Uyn feel scared and insecure these days. But not only Choi-Han, Ron and his son also contributed to his depression. K-Uyn unintentionally turned his gaze towards them. Ron was looking at the rabbits he had caught and laughing, while his son stood beside him sharpening his knife. There are unusual guys like that everywhere. No wonder with him, every moment was like in a situation that hung by a single hair. His appetite also decreased a lot. Choi-Han reassured him a few words and then seriously advised K-Uyn to learn some martial arts to protect himself. K-Uyn smiled and pointed at the escort. Don't I already have a lot? Not to mention he already had the power of an indestructible shield. That's right, so Choi-Han turned his gaze to the leftovers on the table. Saw K-Uyn's frail body, and secretly resolved to protect him. So he didn't care that he had just finished eating, he rushed to practice swordsmanship. Wishing that he would become stronger, which inevitably made K-Uyn more insecure. Is he trying to be stronger to blow the whole continent away? So scary, K-Uyn thought. At that time, Beakrok specially brought another dish to help him eat more. At the same time, the vice captain ordered everyone to gather at the back for training. The convoy continued its journey. According to the original, 3 days later the dragon will go mad. K-Uyn's convoy was in the territory owned by a viscount, which adjacents to the territory of the Henadis family. At the bottom of the mountain, to the right of the village, is that viscount's mansion. And behind the mountain is the place where the Black Dragon is being held. It is known that this viscount is the dog under the command of Marquis Stan. Venian Stan's second son, who harmed his brother to the point of disability to take the position of inheritance. He was the one who regularly visited the mansion to torment the poor dragon, made it get mad and destroy the village. Just thinking about it made K-Uyn mad. The deputy butler saw him panting and angry, thought he was angry because he was tired, quickly informed Choi-Han so that he could go look for an inn. Before he left, K-Uyn kindly advised him to come back soon. After all, he was just a teenager, cared for by someone else. Choi Han smiled and nodded. Yes. I'll be right back. K-Uyn suddenly felt unsettled. He had the feeling of being handed a poison apple with a sticky, sweaty hand. A feeling of discomfort, frustration. And soon, the cause of that feeling will also be revealed. Before Choi Han could leave, something unexpected happened. In a situation that hung by a single hair, Choi Han rushed out like a savior, pushed the old man aside and saved him from being crushed under the wheel of the carriage. On the roof of the carriage was a flag fluttering. It was the emblem of Marquis Stan. K-Uyn sighed and got off the carriage. Seems like he still has to get to the place where the old script plays out, anyway. Vinian Stan, a typical powerful aristocrat, and also the typical villain in the novel The Birth of a Hero. His close servant got out of the car. His rotten personality was no different from his master. Instead of apologizing for nearly stabbing someone, he blamed the poor old man that he was up to do something, obstructed the way of the noble carriage, and barricaded the carriageway. He also called the old man a stupid plebeian. Needless to say, this infuriated Choi Han. His eyes began to fill with murderous intent, as if he only had to say one more word and Choi Han would send him to hell. At this moment, Vinian got off the carriage, stopped his servant from continuing to argue with Choi Han. His dangerous eyes turned to Choi Han. Knowing Vinian's identity, Hans was quite reserved, went over to whisper to K-Uyn that it seemed like Choi Han was agitated. Taking the position of the master, K-Uyn approached to calm Choi Han. At this moment, Choi Han was still not convinced. Why should he stop when they were the ones who were wrong? They could have turned to get out of the way, but they kept running in the direction of the old man. K-Uyn knew that, but Vinian was not an ordinary psycho, so it would be best to do nothing in order to avoid the consequences later. K-Uyn tacitly evaluated Vinian. Shining golden hair and a slightly smiling face. The outfit is neat, without a single wrinkle. Shoes without a stain. But what caught K-Uyn's attention was that there was a red stain on the sleeve of his white shirt. It seems the red blood stain appeared when he visited the dragon. Vinian went over to give K-Uyn a few polite greetings. He knew all about the Hennedes family background as well as K-Uyn's reputation. K-Uyn admitted that he was the scoundrel in the rumor Vinian mentioned. Like his servant, Vinian considered everything that happened to be the fault of the waste that was the old man from earlier, and did not forget to remind K-Uyn of Choi Han's improper behavior, and that attitude needed to be re-educated. Hearing Vinian's words, the old man couldn't help but panic. Knowing that he had made him unhappy, he confessed his guilt, bowed and begged for forgiveness. The status of the people of each domain will be affected by the personality of the ruler of that territory. So from this incident, it can be seen that the Viscount of this region, just like his master, is an aristocrat who considers himself superior and abusive. K-Uyn was also annoyed by Vinian's behavior, who deserved to be beaten by Choi Han. However, Choi Han was under him. Moreover, he also represented the whole Hennedes family. It was not good to quarrel with other aristocrats. Furthermore, this aristocrat was a psycho. He'd better talk perfunctorily and get out of there. Looking at the old man who was kneeling in front of him, K-Uyn couldn't bear it. K-Uyn patted him on the shoulder, pretended to ask where the end was to distract, and then extended his hand out to shake hands with Vinian. He stared at that hand. His hand just touched that dirty old plebeian. Now he wants to shake his hand, no way. At this moment, the servant noticed and urged him to set off quickly. Vinian pretended to scold his servant for interrupting the conversation between two aristocrats. But inwardly, he couldn't help but praise. So he shook hands with K-Uyn and quickly withdrew his hand, then turned around and got into the carriage. K-Uyn fulfilled the role of alcoholic aristocrat. He also didn't forget to mock his position as a successor. Vinian disdained, turned around and put on a gentle face, smiled at K-Uyn, said a few words and left. K-Uyn watched Vinian's carriage leave. He couldn't help but pray that he wouldn't see the psychopath again. Then reminded Choi Han that half of the aristocrats would be like that. Tacitly reminded him to get used to it. When he turned around, he saw the old man still kneeling on the ground. He went to ask and ordered Choi Han to escort him home. Coincidentally, the old man was the owner of the only inn in the village, so K-Uyn's convoy didn't need to go looking for a place to rest. They just needed to follow the old man home. Suddenly Choi Han called K-Uyn to ask him, why didn't he get angry about the attitude of that Marquis Vinian? K-Uyn asked him in return why did he have to be angry. About how he looked down on Choi Han, how he asked K-Uyn to re-educate him, or how he called that old man who almost died a waste. He wasn't a person who could say those words, and didn't want to say them, and didn't get angry either. He knew it would be cool to say that because that's what Choi Han would do. However, with his current position, that was not the time. This is what he learned from life. Compromising with power, accepting moderate irrationality. To some extent help him live a life of his own free will. And the important thing is, he will take revenge. So, sooner or later he will let that Venian get kicked out of his family. Because he will steal the dragon from his hand.